He's got me walking that grief one. Going slow mo. He's got me talking that grief tongue. Going slow mo. He's got me clocking out.
It's the Miami Night Show.
Hey, yeah. Slow mo. He's got me walking that grief one. Going slow mo. He's got me talking that grief tongue. Going slow mo. He's got me clocking out.
What up, Tribe? It's Miami Night Show, Master Grief Coach. Welcome to the Miami Night Show. You got me walking that grief walk. It's time for Grief Talk, y'all.
I talk about things you think about.
It's Miami Night Show, Master Grief Coach.
Brian Smith is a certified life coach and grief guide and a small business consultant. Brian's mission is to help others by sharing lessons he has learned from decades of experience and study. Brian became well acquainted with grief in 2015 after the sudden passing of his 15-year-old daughter, Shayna. After Shayna's passing, Brian felt his life was over. He had to learn to survive for the sake of his wife, Tywana, and their daughter, Kayla. Brian has studied the nature of life and death and how to progress through grief. In his grief work, Brian provides a safe space where you can safely share what you are experiencing. Perhaps most importantly, he can help you understand that death is not goodbye and that the relationship with you and your loved one can continue. His understanding is not a religious-based belief, but a position arrived at based on reason and evidence. Brian is on the board of Soul Phone Foundation and Helping Parents Heal. Brian is the author of Grief to Growth, Planted, Not Buried. He is the host of Grief to Growth podcast. You can find Brian at www.grieftogrowth.com.
Grief are challenges. Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith.
Welcome back, Grief Nation listeners, and thank you for tuning in to It's the Miami Night Show, Grief Talk. Today on our show, I have grief guide Brian Smith, who is a shining light parent, and he's going to talk to us a little bit today about an array of things. So let's just get right into it. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Hi, ma'am. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. So talk to us about your journey with your daughter, Shayna.
All right. Well, I'll start with Shayna's transition. My journey actually starts obviously long before that, but I'll start with her transition. Shayna was 15 years old when she made a transition from this world into the next world. And that was on June 24th of 2015. Shayna was, she would have been going into 10th grade. She was a volleyball player. She was a basketball player. She was a top student athlete. She was like 16 in her class out of about 600. We'd homeschooled her for like 8 years, so she'd only been in public school for a couple of years. Shayna had been diagnosed with a syndrome called Wolff-Parkinson's White, which is a syndrome where the heart actually accelerates just on its own. But with Shayna's case, it would always accelerate, usually for about 30 seconds at a time, and it would go back into a normal rhythm. So we'd had a couple of procedures on her. They're called ablations, and the cardiologist told us she would be fine. Come back every couple of years to have it checked out. It was not a life-threatening thing. And if anything, it should have affected her during exercise. So we had no idea that Shayna, had any kind of a serious condition. It was considered to be very mild and very controllable. So on June 24th of 2015, my wife actually went to wake her up. I was out on my morning walk. And I was in my office. Take that back. I was in my office. My wife went to wake her up because Shayna hadn't been responding to the text my wife was sending her, saying it's time to come down to the basement and go to work because she helped us with the business. When we went to wake her up, she was unresponsive. So we called the ambulance, of course, took her to the hospital where she was pronounced as having deceased. So this was obviously sudden. It was unexpected. It was a shock. So you go through the whole thing of like, did this really happen? You feel like you're walking through a dream. I mean, literally 1 second, I'm in my office and everything's okay in the world. And, a few minutes later, my entire world has changed. And I remember being at the hospital when the chaplain came in to tell us that they had pronounced her. And I'm like, this is it. This is the end of my life. My life is over. I mean, it's just literally a thought that went through my head. I don't know how do I go on from this? I mean, you can't even imagine a life without your youngest daughter. We have two daughters, Shayna and her sister Kayla. Kayla's 3 years older. So Kayla was on vacation at the time, so I had to call Kayla and tell her. And telling her that her sister didn't wake up that morning is just like, it's the worst thing I've ever had to do. So that's what kind of kicked things off in terms of my grief journey. And so from there, it was crazy. I mean, literally, like the next day, I just had this feeling like you need to start a blog, and I wanted to journal my journey. So I started a blog, ShaynaLane.com. That's her name. Her name, by the way, means shining light, or beautiful light. Her name is Beautiful Light. Yeah. So I started the blog, and I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? But people said to me, okay, well, you should contact this person. So I contact that person. They would connect me with the next person. Someone would send me a book. Someone directed me to a guy named Mark Ireland, who had started a group called Helping Parents Heal. So I contacted Mark. He and I started communicating back and forth. Ended up talking to the president of Helping Parents Heal. Her name is Elizabeth Boisson. She's one of the co-founders. And then just this whole series of synchronicities came about where Kayla goes, for the vacation this year, the year after Shayna passed, let's not go to the beach because that's where we always would go. Let's go to the desert, the opposite. So let's go to Arizona. So we go to Arizona, which we had never been to before. It happens to be where Elizabeth Boisson lives. So we didn't know that. So we met Elizabeth, started a chapter of Helping Parents Heal, and I could go on, but all these connections started just happening. I started meeting people, and doors started opening up. And so finally, 4 years into my journey, I guess this was last year, someone came to me and said, you should take this life coaching course. And I'm like, why would I do that? I've never thought about becoming a life coach. I've never mentioned that to you. This person happened to be a medium, so she was very intuitive. Yeah. So I took the course, and I'm like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. So I became a certified life coach. And because of my grief journey and my probably thousands of hours working with parents, I decided to really kind of specialize in grief because that's what I know. Yeah. So I started Grief to Growth June of last year. So it's been just about a year.
Wow. That's an amazing journey. And I'm sorry for your loss. And like you said, so after all of the things that occurred after losing Shayna, I'm sitting here thinking like your journey has been just so significant to this time as well. So just like you were saying, all the different synchronicities that kept happening. Mm-hmm. And then now here we are having this conversation, and you've been, working tirelessly, I'm sure, in the field of working with parents and, working with others in regards to grief. And how has just being a part of the grief world and doing that work, how has that transpose your life just outside of the regular norm? Because I'm sure before your daughter passed away you were doing something totally different, but how has over this time period of you after your loss and all of the things that, like you said, just the synchronicities, how really has that changed?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, Miami. I had never heard of anything like soul planning or anything like that before Shayna had passed. And right now in the world I'm immersed in, there's this big debate about free will versus determinism or predestination. Mm-hmm. And that's another whole nother complicated subject we could get on. But there's a Danish philosopher that said, the life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forward. Mm-hmm. And so as I look back over my life, I realized that everything set up the next thing. So when I said my journey started long before Shayna passed, when I was a child, I had this fear of death. And a really intense, it's called thanatophobia. I mean, it's just not a normal fear of death. This was like, I'd have panic attacks. Mm. So this happened from the time I was about 15 until I was about 40. So I was on this long journey myself to understand, what is death? Do we really die? What happens when we die? Are we really, eternal? I want to know this for sure. Mm-hmm. So I did all this research on NDEs and mediumship and after death communications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when Shayna passed, I already had all that knowledge. I already had it intellectually. And so what I've realized, again, after she passed, it seems like this was planned, that it was all set up for me to be doing the work that I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. So What's changed is I still have a business. My wife and I sell hair care products. It's called Treasure Locks. We sell black hair care products.
Okay.
We still have that. That's our main income. But what's really happened is I feel like I'm coming into my calling now.
Yeah.
So I'm doing this work, and I'm making that transition myself into what I feel like I was put here to do. And for the last 35 years, it's what I've been preparing to do.
Now, during that process and you're transitioning, did you do any grief counseling or what, or did you have that part of the grief community to support you? Did you do any counseling or your family at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a volunteer counselor that came to our house for a little while. She was excellent, and that was really helpful in the first part of grief when you have no idea what to expect,
Right.
and you don't know even what's normal. So that was very helpful. I went to a professional grief counselor. I went to see him like 3 times. The thing about traditional grief counseling, though, the guys you go to like that, they won't talk to you too much about the afterlife or staying connected. Traditional grief counseling has always been like, let's adjust to the fact that you're going to live without this person for the rest of your life and maybe for the rest of eternity because they're just gone.
Yeah.
So I went to see this guy 3 times, and it was interesting because after 3 times, he and I agreed. It's like, not that he wasn't doing a good job, but I was doing more helping him than he was helping me because of all the things that I already knew.
Right.
But what I found really helpful was I found an organization called Helping Parents Heal.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier shining light parents. That's a term that's coined by Helping Parents Heal. It's got a double meaning. One is our children are shining lights, so they continue on, and we believe that, and we maintain that relationship. And the second thing is, as parents, we can become shining lights ourselves. So we really encourage parents to maintain that connection with their child and to heal and to become the best person that you can be, going through this experience. So that helped me more than anything. Was looking at people who were ahead of me on the journey and seeing how they had done and how they were coping, and to understand, you can get through this. And then after I'd been into it for like a year and a half, 2 years, starting to help people that were kind of coming behind me on the journey.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting kind of a chain of events where we help each other.
Yeah.
So that's been more helpful than anything else that I've done.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So that's going to bring me into asking you, how do you feel about the grief stages, or during your transition? Do you feel that you had these stages that you went through, or do you feel that they were just emotions that you had?
Yeah. The thing about the stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did some work on the 5 stages of dying. I believe that work has been misapplied to the grief process. The dying process is different because, so it's a different process. So I think, and I believe this is true, she said she kind of wishes she had never, even coined that phrase. As far as grief goes, there's a guy, I can never remember his name when I'm in an interview. I need to remember his name, but he said grief is a container for emotions. It's not really an emotion itself. So when we're going through grief, all these different things come up, and you won't be, but some people might be surprised by there'll be numbness sometimes. I just don't feel anything. And I've had people come to me and say, I think there's something wrong with me. I don't even feel sad. But it's because you're so overwhelmed.
Right.
So there's numbness, there's shock, there's fear, there's denial, there's guilt, there's anger. All these things come up, and it's kind of a swirl. They're like waves. They'll come over you. And they don't come up in any particular order, and there's no particular time frame. So the bad thing about the 5 stages of dying is it's kind of laid out in an order, and people think, okay, now I'm in this stage, now I'm in this stage. And with grief, it's more like I'm in this stage, now I'm back in this stage, now I'm in this stage. I think this one's over, but now it's back again. So that's more how grief is.
Yeah. So for a person that just may be new or fresh to their grief journey, what advice would you have for them?
The first thing is whatever you're feeling, it's probably normal. I think people feel very alone, and people feel like I'm the only one that's ever felt this. Like I said, the numbness thing, people say, I think something's broken. I'm just not, I'll never have emotions again. Or some people think if I start crying, I'll never stop.
Yeah.
And you will. I mean, but crying is actually very important to going through the grief process. There can be a feeling, especially I think if you lose a child, that you want to be with your child, which people will misunderstand as suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
Wanting to be with your child is not the same thing as being suicidal. If you're planning it and you're thinking about it and you're contemplating it, then you need to get professional help. But if you just have this longing to be with your child, that's a normal thing. I mean, every parent wants to be with their child. Every parent wants to protect their child.
Absolutely.
So one of the biggest things I tell people is like, whatever you're going through, it's probably normal. It's temporary. You will get beyond it. It will get better, but it feels like it's going to be forever. And
Yeah.
I felt the same thing, so I can understand it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You authored The Grief to Growth, Planted, Not Buried. So share that experience.
Well, it's interesting because after Shayna passed, I had several people, intuitives, telling me, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. Shayna's telling me you need to write a book. So I thought it was going to be a book about like my life and my experience, which I haven't done. But I realized after all this working with parents, it's like I had a pretty good idea of what the grief journey was like. And I wanted to share my experience, what I had learned from the research that I had done. And I wanted to make it very compact because people going through grief, frankly, can't retain too much. You're literally brain damaged. A lot of times they can't read. So I wanted to record it into an audiobook format. So I did that. But it's really just, it's kind of a handbook. It's kind of like, okay, here's probably what you're going to experience. Here are some things that can help you as you're going through the experience. Just a guide for people, because when we find ourselves in that really, really intense grief for the first time, it's so disorienting. And as I said, you can feel very alone. So I wanted people to understand, okay, someone else has gone through this and you can go through it too.
Yes. I'm excited. I have not bought it yet, haven't read it, but I'm definitely going to do that. So Grief Nation listeners, please take your time out today and go to Amazon and purchase Grief to Growth by Brian Smith. So let's also talk about during this pandemic and social injustice time, has there been anything that's been birthed? Because a lot of people, we've been so busy during this time and a lot of things have just transpired. And we're just in a space that things have come up for us individually because of our grieving process or just what we've seen in the world. So talk to me about something that maybe you have created or just some thoughts around, what's currently happening, especially in the Black community.
Yeah, well, actually,
In
I have a
all
lot
communities, rather.
I have a lot to say on that. When the coronavirus first started, myself and a lot of spiritual people or spiritual leaders, for lack of a better word, and I want to say this in the wrong way so people get the wrong idea. It's a terrible, terrible, tragic thing.
Yeah.
But we thought maybe this is an opportunity. My book is Grief to Growth, Planted, Not Buried, because I believe that we grow from painful experiences. So not that we rejoice in the painful experience, but we can look forward to the growth.
Mm-hmm.
So when the virus came about, I'm like, well, what things will this reveal? What good things might come out of this? And 2 years from now, how might we be better off as a species, as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I tried to look at it. Frankly, it's been really disappointing that we're 4 months into this and we're so divided.
Yeah.
And it's so political. I'm still hopeful. I still hope that maybe things will get better, but we're not on the path that I was hoping. So we have that we're going on. And then that's triggered with a lot of people, a lot of grief, people that have PTSD.
Yeah.
This has been stressful. People are worried about their jobs. People can't go out and socialize the way they were. So I'm seeing it's compounding a lot of grief. I've seen people I've had to talk so many people down in the last couple of months, with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Then we've got the Black Lives Matter, movement going on. And that's at another level of compounding on top of that. So it's interesting. You and I talked about before we got started. I've created this experience, I call it, called the racial reconciliation experience, where it's mostly white people that are taking it, but it's for anybody. And I talk people through what's the history of racism in America and how systemic it is and how ubiquitous, how endemic it is.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. So I talk people through that. I talk people through my own personal experience as a Black man in America, because a lot of people don't know what it's like. So I try to help them with that. So I put this together because, frankly, people kept asking me to. And what's really interesting is a lot of people that asked me to put it together are now saying, I'm too traumatized to take it right now, because there's just so much going on. I just want to sit and chill and watch Netflix. I don't want to get too deep into this. So the people that have gone through it have been really, encouraged, I think, and really kind of enlightened. But we're all kind of on overdrive right now. But like we were saying earlier, it's just like grief. We're going through this collective grief right now as a nation, and we can either turn and face it and do the work, or we can try to turn away from it and deny it, and it's just gonna keep coming back.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with grief. You just you gotta dive in and take it head on and do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for um, giving us your insight, especially during this time, which is very difficult for a lot of people. Like you stated, we don't really know how to feel at this time. We want to do more, but at the same time, we have to, having these feelings of needing to be more reserved. And I think
Hmm.
a lot of people that just don't know what to do right now, they're just sitting back watching to
Yeah.
see. Because I think a lot of people are just afraid to say something right now. No matter if they want to support, what you're actually doing with racism. What's the name of it again? Because I want to make sure I'm clear with that.
I call it the racial reconciliation
Racial
experience.
records. Okay.
Yeah, and if you go
So
to my website, it's you can find it there.
okay, because I think even in groups, and I'm a part of a women group that are shamans, and a lot of them don't know what to say, and then some do know what to say. Of course, we utilize our spirituality, which is across the board okay, no matter what color that you are. If
Yeah.
we just talk in that realm, in that light, and love on each other that way, but still, yet I've seen a lot of people just kind of on certain posts that may be made, or if this just watching the news and watching our president right now, we can have all these highs and lows throughout the day. And then it's like, it kind of sets others back, because it's like, okay, we're trying to be in this race. We're trying to be in this foot race with our Black community, if they're not Black, and they're trying to support us, but then something else happens during the day, and it's like it's kind of putting it back to racism all over again. So we're having this divide and this split constantly during the daytime,
Yeah.
or at night, whenever we have this flash of news of what's happening. And it's just so disheartening to know that people that are our friends, or our colleagues that do want to support our movements, it's kind of difficult for them right now, just because of things just happening throughout the day, and just not knowing how to support us. So that was my
Yeah.
next question: how can the community support you when there's no certainty of just things that's happening throughout the day that constantly change, when we're thinking we are moving forward, but then we're pushed back?
Yeah, well, you touched on a lot of good stuff there. One thing, it is a landmine out there. I mean, so people are scared. I know some people that are kind of coming to me behind the scenes and saying, "Well, I can't say anything about this, but I'm glad you are, because of my platform,
Yeah.
and because I'm seen as spiritual, I can't be political."
Mm-hmm.
And everything right now is political. I mean, even putting on a mask is considered political. I mean,
Yeah.
I say to people, if aliens came to our planet and saw that there's a virus going on, and half of us are wearing masks and half of us aren't,
They would be
and it's
confused.
because of our politics, they'd say, well, that doesn't make any sense. What does the science say? And
Right.
whichever side you fall on, it should not be a political issue.
Yeah.
The way I look at it, though, frankly, everything is political. And I use Jesus as my example for like almost everything. And
Mm-hmm.
people will say, well, Jesus wasn't political. Jesus was extremely political. That's why he was killed. He was basically killed for treason, because Jesus was going up against the government and the religious leaders. So I try to mind my life on Jesus. So if people tell me, Brian, you're being too political, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
So you ask me what people can do. It's interesting. There's a poor guy. He was a pastor in Atlanta, and he was trying to talk about white fragility, and he used the term white blessing because he knew his church didn't like white fragility. So he used the term white blessing, trying to spare their feelings. Long story short, the guy got crucified because people said he was a white supremacist, because he said that slavery was a white blessing. So
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, we've got to get engaged. We got to get rid of the fear. We got to have permission to speak to each other, to talk to each other frankly. That's what I do in my experience. I'm like, all questions are welcome. I don't record them so people can be open about it.
Yeah.
But it's tough. I was with my neighbors the other day. I mean, I live in an all white area, so we haven't gotten together since March, but we were together Friday night, and I was telling them about this experience that I have. And again, most of them said, "Yeah, this sounds really great. This sounds really great." But only one person has actually signed up for it yet,
Mm-hmm.
out of the group, because people are still a little bit afraid.
Yeah.
We've been friends for 20 years, but they don't really want to talk about this subject.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, it's difficult to be in that space when hey, we're cool, we're friends, we we should be used to having just this conversation, because that's all it is, just a conversation. No right, if we're right, wrong, or indifferent, it's still just a conversation that needs to be had. But I'm so thankful and grateful that you have created a platform for this, so that we can become more engaged with having the topic of conversation about it. So thank you for just enlightening us on that path. So tell me, if you had to explain grief, what it is and what it is not, what is grief?
Well, grief is, I define it in the book, and I can't remember exact words I use, but basically it's a profound sense of loss. So, and it's really kind of when your mind says one thing, like it should be this way, and it's this way. So my daughters should be with me, your sons should be with me, and they're not. I should have that job, and I don't. I lost the job, or I got divorced, or whatever it is. So grief doesn't have to be the loss of a person. We typically think of it that way because that loss seems permanent. So we can lose a job and get another job. We can have an auto accident. We can buy another car. When we lose a person, that person can't be replaced. And if your belief is such that that person is gone, that's a permanent loss, that's what makes grief so profound. So what I try to do with people, it's really all a matter of how you look at things. Everything's a matter of perspective. So if we can shift our view from I lost this person, and you're really happy said that I lost Shayna because I didn't lose her. She's not lost. I know where she is. I know that she's well. I know I can continue to have a relationship with her. So that's where I try to get my clients to. We still always have this sense of longing. It doesn't mean that grief ever goes away. We never heal from it. We never get over it. But we learn to deal with it, and it becomes easier to carry. And I use an analogy. If you're a weightlifter and you go to the gym, you start lifting a 25-pound weight. When you first start lifting it, it's going to feel very heavy. But eventually you're going to carry around and you're not even going to feel it anymore. And that's kind of how grief is. It's like we're still carrying that grief. It's still a little bit of a burden. But if we know that we can talk to our kid all the time, if we know that every day we're one day closer to seeing them again, if we know that they're proud of us and they're cheering us on, then we can carry it a little bit easier. And we can actually look forward to our life and what can I accomplish between now and the time that I go to join them again.
Yeah. Well, throughout our interview, you've said a lot of different euphemisms in regards to death or transitioning or lost. So what is the correct terminology for you, so that people can understand on all levels? What is that? What would you say as far as your daughter no longer being here? Is it transition? Because a lot of people don't like to say passed away. Some don't like to say dead. So what is the terminology that you would use for your daughter?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on what audience I'm talking to. If I'm talking to just lay people, and it's just I might even use the word died. I very rarely use the word died. It was fun talking to my friend the other day, Mark Pitstick, who's an expert on death and stuff. And we were talking about how the language can be so cumbersome because in our society, the simplest way to say is dead, but dead is dead wrong because people don't die. No one has ever died. Your body dies. So the body does die. And I was talking to my grief counselor, the first one that came to the house. And she said, when I hear people using euphemisms, I realize they haven't accepted yet that their person has died. And I'm like, no, that's not true. The body dies. And I've accepted the fact that Shayna's body has died. And if I talk about Shayna's body, I will say we had Shayna's body cremated. You'll never hear me say that we cremated Shayna because you don't cremate people. You don't bury people. You bury bodies. So it's a long way of answering your question, but I use lots of different terminology because it's really always a metaphor. Yeah. So transition is probably the one I use most often because it is. I mean, from near-death experiences, we know when their bodies stop functioning, they literally step out of it. They'll describe their body as it was like taking off an old coat. And I looked back at it and I was grateful for the time my body served me, but I felt no attachment to it. And I looked at it and I said, that's not me. So I use the word transition. Sometimes I'll use the word graduate. I read a book by a guy. I love this one. He called it Risen. He called his loved one that passed on the risen ones because we actually rise when we come out of our bodies. And we need to look at it instead of we're going down into the grave, we're rising. So I like that term too.
Oh, growth. That was really good. Thank you for sharing that. Now, is there still any spiritual reactions or experiences that you still have with Shayna today,
Oh,
or
wow.
just recent?
Yeah, it's funny because this happened just the other day. Our ceiling fan in our bedroom has always been something Shayna has messed with since she first transitioned. It's been 5 years. So the light coming on, the light going off, the fan coming on, the fan going off, it not working, it working. So the other day, I was doing an interview and the fan had stopped working for a few days. So we thought we needed to change the battery in the remote. And the day I was doing the interview, the fan just started working again. And the person in the interview asked me if I ever got any signs from Shane. And I said, actually, just a few minutes ago, the
Yeah.
fan just came on again.
Yeah.
So that's just one. But like our angel date was June 24th, which was just a couple of weeks ago at this point, about a month ago. And I was like, I'm not going to ask for any signs because I don't want to be disappointed because I'm like everybody else. You know, I still have my ups and downs and doubts, and 5th anniversary is a tough one. So I was taking my wife to therapy. She had a knee replacement. So we're driving to therapy and I'm trying to get through the day. And my wife looks up at the truck in front of us, and on the back of the truck, it wasn't a bumper sticker. It was like stenciled on the back of the truck. It said, "I am right here," with an exclamation point. And my wife looks at it, and I was out of it. She goes, "That's a sign from Shayna." I'm like, okay, could it be more obvious? Because, I am right here. And then on the bumper, on the back window, there was one of those stickers. There's this logo people do now with the word home. And it's H, and then the state is as the O. So in our case, it's Ohio, M-E. Well, it was a home sticker, and it was the state of Ohio. And Shayna, we live in Ohio, and Shayna was born in Ohio. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I am right here. I'm home. Was a message that I got from that. Yeah. That was on her angelversary date. And on that date, we got several other signs. Like I said, the ceiling fan light coming on, it doesn't come on that often anymore. Yeah. But one of our friends that I asked Shayna to turn on the light on her angelversary date, and it came on that day.
Wow.
So she's done things like my phone. She changed all my podcast covers on my phone for my episodes to a picture of her. And it was only on my phone because I panicked at first. I thought my entire podcast now has this picture of Shayna on the cover.
Yeah.
But it was only on my phone.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how she did that.
Wow. Wow. That is so amazing. Yeah. I get things from Tyke all the time. Just recently, I remember him just sharing with me, mom, because he was a rapper as well, and he left this huge catalog of his work. And just recently he was saying, Mom, all the work that you've done, great, but can you please get my music out there? And I was just been so I guess afraid to kind of release some of the things, because he was into trap music. That's a whole different lifestyle than what I lead. And so I was a little concerned about that. And then one morning, my cell phone was just playing the song. And because I had been, kind of just dodging it. I mean, I know this is what I need to do as a parent, is continually to, spread his light and his journey and what all he was going through, because Tyke was originally shot in 2011. And this was after all of the music that he created after coming back from a traumatic brain injury that he wanted to that he wants to share. And I was just not ready, because I'm focused on my own goals of how I want to honor him. But he just kept showing and sharing, Mom, and it's like, people really have to understand, in order to have a conversation, to communicate still with your loved one, or to still have that relationship, just commune with them, engage with them. I have an altar. I have, just not that. I just have my memories, and I go in my spiritual space sometimes, and I just still love on him, and I know, just like you said, during those death anniversary dates, it brings up all of these emotions and how we feel. So I'm so glad that you stated that, because a lot of times people forget, even though they know it's coming up, because we have this built up anxiety of that day coming. They don't know how to process it, but it's really just going through the day, don't you think?
I know people that torture themselves about angelversaries. I mean, for weeks or months in advance, they'll just start, it's going to be terrible. And then frankly, sometimes our friends actually add to that. Yeah. Oh, I know our angelversary is coming up. I know you're going to feel bad that day.
Yeah.
What we do is every birthday, every angelversary date, we have pizza, we have ice cream. We do the things that Shayna, would want to do if she was here. So we make it an honor of her. When I tell people, I look at these things as not, when someone transitions, we really sometimes stick them in the past. So we say, Shayna, June 24th, 2015 was the last time I saw her.
Mhm.
And so you can look at it like every day I'm moving away from her. This is the way I actually envisioned it at first.
Mhm.
So every day was just like, it was like hell, because every day I'm getting farther from my daughter. I look at it now as every day I'm getting closer to my daughter because I'm going to
Yeah.
see her again. And
Mhm.
so when those angel dates come up, I look at them as milestones. So I'm like, I'm proud of myself. I made
Yeah.
it 5 years. I never thought I'd make it 5 years.
Yeah.
So you celebrate those days. Don't look at them as like terrible times. Look at them as like, look how strong you are, that you made it this far, which is what your loved one would want. And instead of looking at your journey as like, I'm going to live, the rest of my life without her, look at every day I'm moving closer to being with her.
Yeah. Yeah. And honoring them in that way. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. How can my Grief Nation listeners reach you?
Um, I'm on, my website is grief2growth.com. It's grief, the number 2, growth.com. And everything is the same thing. So my book is Grief to Growth. My podcast is Grief to Growth. So you can find me there. I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook page. It's also, Grief to Growth. So I'm really active on Facebook, so people can friend me on Facebook, or you can find me through my page.
Okay, thank you so much. And some of the episodes for your podcast and your YouTube channel, I that's how I ended up finding you. I actually was just surfing through YouTube one day and looking up podcasts, and that's how I came across you. And thank you so much for the interview that you also did with me.
Yeah.
You have so many amazing guests that you have brought on. And so what has been one of those episodes that you can mention that that has actually created some support for your community, or that you are still able to refer others to?
Wow, that's a great question. I've been so fortunate with my guest list. I feel bad even mentioning any of them to leave out
Oh, it's
others.
okay.
But I do a lot of interviews with near-death experiencers, and the thing about a near-death experience, it's a tangible touch to the other side.
Yeah.
And people might say, well, it's a hallucination of a dying brain. It's certainly not. It's been proven that it's not. There's what's called veridical near-death experiences, where people can actually say things that are validated by what was going on in the room when they were
Mhm.
supposedly dead, or
Yeah.
something that went on even down the hall or across the country. So one of my favorites, there is a woman named Heidi Craig who had a near-death experience. And she said 3 things to me that she learned from her near-death experience. One is that everything is as it should be, and all will be well. All will be as it should be, and we're unconditionally loved all the time, no matter what. We're never alone. And I don't think I'll ever forget that. That's just 3 very simple lessons that she learned from her near-death experience.
Mhm.
But I've also interviewed a lot of shining light parents,
Yeah.
and seeing the resilience that they've been through. I interview healers, people that can help people, go through, what we all have to go through. Um, I just interviewed a guy named Dr. Mark Pitstick, which that one's not up yet, but he's just like a death expert. The guy's been studying death for like 47 years.
Mhm.
So just the wealth of knowledge. So it's a whole variety of different people. I try to introduce people to new ideas. I've got a guy coming up. Hopefully he'll make the interview, because I'm so excited to interview him. It's called idealism. It's a philosophy of how we look at the world. And I
Mhm.
really believe that if people looked at the world this way, it would change the way we feel about ourselves as human beings.
Yeah.
And I don't have time to go into it right now, but it's so what I try to do with people is, I'm not asking anybody to have faith. I'm not asking anybody to believe anything I say. It's all about me presenting to you evidence. It's all about me presenting to you different ways to look at things, um, to help people to understand that, that there's a greater reality out there that we don't really see on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
and to make a shift in perspective.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm glad that I kind of touched back on that, because I feel as though for my Grief Nation listeners, for anyone that happens to come across my page, that's what the work is there for. It's a collective group of people, of individuals that I have, interviewed, but yet I guess I could say just how I have broken down the playlist from different varieties of, the aspect of grief experts to survivor moms that also are affected by gun violence. And
Hmm.
because a lot of times, when I go to different podcasts and I'm looking for, just some inspiration or whatnot, I'm not looking at the the entirety of the YouTube channel. So I wanted you to definitely talk about that, just, breaking down your playlist of who all can I identify that has supported me. And then I can also relate, clients or coachable people that wants to be supported. Here are some things that I can refer you to. Listen to these podcasts so that you can learn and be more engaged with a new community that you can become part of, or just, I just think it's what we're doing as far as podcasters and talking about grief, just not grief specifically. We just have this array of stuff, information and data that's available to individuals. So I'm just so grateful that you are on this platform as well, and that you're sharing all the people that and you're giving us so much insight on the talks about grief and dying, and just in general becoming resilient. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I guess the commonality is growth. I mean, I do talk grief to growth. That's because that's how I got to where I am. But the one thing that ties all my guests together, it's about growth. It's about how do we become the people that we are meant to be? So whether that's triggered by grief, which it is for a lot of people, or maybe you haven't experienced grief, but you say, I want to grow without going through it. When I talked to near-death experience, I just interviewed a young man last week who had a near-death experience at the age of 24. And we were saying, everybody says, people that learn about everybody says, I want a near-death experience. It's like, no, you don't.
No,
it's rough. You don't want one.
Yeah.
But you can get the lessons of a near-death experience just by listening to them. This has been documented by research.
Yeah.
So I encourage everybody, before you have a near-death experience, before you have a grief thing, study near-death experiences.
Yeah.
They will literally change your life.
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you, I went through that with my son when he was originally, shot back in 2011, and having that experience. And actually, he didn't realize this, but when I remember during his interview with the detectives, he was telling them that his best friend that was killed in the double shooting as well, that he woke him up and was telling him to get up. And, over some time they were saying, no, that couldn't have happened because he was shot twice. So we know that he never was able to get out of the car, just from evidence. And but Tyke just really was focused on, yes, I know the only reason I got up, because he ended up getting out of the car. He got out of the car and was trying to make it back to the hospital because they were on the hospital grounds. And he just really, really in his whole heart felt that his friend told him to get up and was shaking him up. That's how he was able to get up. But that near-death experience for him was very traumatic. And of course, 5 years later after that, Tyke died by gun suicide. So just, it's difficult going through that. And I'm so glad to hear that that you have interviewed a lot of individuals that have gone through the near-death experience. And I'm going to definitely make sure that I share, those videos, because it's important. This
episode, it should come out actually tomorrow. The guy's name is Chris Keto.
Yeah.
And it was really good because a lot of times with the near-death experience, we think it's all love and light. And it's great. But the thing is that, especially for young people, integrating that back into your life, and I interviewed PMH Atwater, who's the #1 researcher on near-death experiences. And she was saying for adults, it takes like up to 7 to 14 years to integrate the near-death experience. For children, it could be 20, 30 years to integrate it.
Yeah.
So for a young man like your son, we don't realize how difficult it is to come back from that and to function in this world again.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for being on the It's the Miami Night Show Grief Talk. Is there anything else that is happening currently in your community that you're serving that you would like to see change or bring further awareness to before we go?
No, I would encourage people, if you're interested in the racial stuff that's going on right now, it's, I think, pretty timely, my racial reconciliation experience, which you can find on my page. As we're all going through the coronavirus and everything else we're going through, be gentle with yourself, but there's always a balance too. And it's an opportunity. It's a time for us to do the work. A lot of us are spending a lot more time at home. We're spending a lot more time. We can have some self-reflection. So take this as an opportunity to do some work on yourself as well.
Thank you so much, Brian. Have a great day.
There you have it, Grief Nation listeners. And thank you for tuning in to another transformative segment on It's the Miami Night Show Grief Talk. Today, we give thanks filled with love and gratitude for our special guest, Brian Smith, for expressing your unique grief journey and sharing ways of understanding the healing process. This is your girl, Miami Night, with much love and light until we connect again spiritually. Bye-bye.
He's got me walking that grief walk. Going slow mo. He's got me talking that grief talk. Going slow mo. He's got me clocking the
It's the Miami Night Show.
hey, yeah. Slow mo. He's got me walking that grief walk. Going slow mo. He's got me talking that grief talk. Going slow mo. He's got me clocking the
What up, Tribe? It's Miami Night, your master grief coach. Welcome to the Miami Night Show. You got me walking that grief walk. It's time for grief talk, y'all.
I talk about things you think about.
It's Miami Night Show, master grief coach.